Assalamu alaikum. So we're here now, presenting to you another discussion in the series of various discussions we're having as part of our Think 2025 campaign, which is to really imagine Pakistan in 2025 and to talk about sustainable development path across the various aspects of the economy, including energy, leading up to that year. So today I'm very honored to have with me somebody who's been in this sector for a while. He's had a very diverse experience, Mr. Fawad Hayat. So Fawad Hayat right now is part of the National Disaster Risk Management Fund, which is a very unique fund, first one of its kind, I guess.
True, very true.
Funded by the Asian Development Bank. And previously Fawad has been working with the Ministry of Climate Change across the various financing platforms, working on bringing some of that fund to Pakistan across GCF, Green Climate Fund, and GEF. So a very diverse experience across the sustainability sector. So first of all, Fawad, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I must commend you for having accumulated a lot of these badges in a very short span of time. I mean, you're the youngest guest we've had so far. We haven't had many. I mean, this is the fourth conversation, but
I'm obliged and privileged for that, to hear that.
How do you do so much in such a short span of time?
I think it's primarily two things. One is your luck and the other is hard work.
Excellent.
You see, Pakistan gives you a lot of opportunity. A lot of us are laid back, especially when you work with the government and other stakeholders. A lot of people are doing business as usual. They want to maintain the status quo. And that is one of the reasons that we are probably thinking of Think 2025, which should have been done earlier as well. This should have been long ago and we should have been on the track. But this is primarily what I would say, that we, in this country, we get opportunities. And if somebody can catch it, it should not be an issue for that.
Fantastic. I think you mentioned luck and hard work. I guess the other way around. Hard work comes first and then you expect to get
Maybe.
lucky, right? Nobody gets lucky sitting on the couch. So I think you have to give credit where it's due, right? So the first question I would ask you, Fawad, because I think it's quite a difficult name. I mean, we were debating it like before this dialogue. The NDRMF. So NDRMF, how is it unique? What is the mandate? What are you doing as part of this fund?
You see, I'll give you a brief introduction of why the need arose for this NDRMF. We look at the 2005 earthquakes. Then we look at the 2010 floods. Then followed by the 2010 floods, the 11, 12, 14, 16 floods, all these years. And even this time around, 2019, we are not really expecting, but there is some kind of a warning for some sort of floods this year. And when I look at the global German index, we are put at the 7th most vulnerable or the 7th most hit towards climate change issues. So looking at all these things, the government started to work on the fact that, okay, how much have we actually spent on these disasters? So if I start from the 2005 earthquake up till now, $24.7 billion has been lost as part of these disasters. So that is when the need arose. We should actually start working on preparedness, because in a context when we see at different things, at times we come across a figure that $1 spent in preparedness could actually save up to say $7 to $10 post-disaster. So that's huge. The 2010 floods, according to the calculation of our CEO, was then working, who's been with the DRM for good 15, 18 years now, it was about 400 million. And eventually we lost $10.2 billion. So that's huge difference.
Indeed.
But as a developing country with cash-starved situation, and we don't actually invest on disasters, preparedness, we just leave it to the nature maybe, and then we come across it as and when it happens. So this is the first time that they realized that, okay, now this is the time. If we are the 7th most vulnerable, this thing is not going to stop. This did not start in 2005, this is going to go. And this is not going to be earthquakes or floods or anything. We face floods, we face earthquakes, we face drought mitigation, we face cyclones. So you see, these are the hazards we come across. So that is when they asked and talked to the Asian Development Bank to give some seed money, which they provided as $200 million. to start with, then some money came from the government itself, from their own kitty, and then there are other smaller donors as well. And we started with the National Disaster Risk Management Fund. The fund in itself is first of its kind in the region, rather globally, and this would be replicated if it's a success. We actually have been working around for a year now. The CEO joined April last year. There are a number of interventions we are taking care of. We work on the flood protection infrastructures with government, with non-government, that is NGOs, INGOs, development partners. We work on the drought mitigation. The project can be anywhere, obviously, wherever that's drought affected areas. And then we're working on the seismic retrofitting of buildings. We even have zone 3 and 4, and we have development already done there. So we cannot really move all that development overnight to any other places. That's not possible. But what we can do is that we try to figure out which public buildings could be saved because of some of the retrofitting interventions to be done. So that's what we're doing. One important part which the fund is currently taking law is getting a NatCat model done. That's a natural catastrophe model for 4 major hazards, which I mentioned earlier, for the country. So that this would actually give us an idea of the country that, okay, how can we actually go for sustainable development, climate resilient development. That's what we need. I mean, we shouldn't be making something if on a building in zone 4 if that can be avoided. We would have somewhere left, right, a better zone to develop certain things. So that's one thing. So we are having the natural catastrophe model for 4 different hazards. Then we're working on a micro level, we're working on the MHVRAs, which is called the multi-hazard vulnerability risk assessments of districts. That's done at the district UC. So we've picked up initially 15 districts. We intend to go for another 15, 20, and we'll try to cover these. And then provinces are taking their own initiatives. Sindh is getting its entire number of districts for MHVRAs done. GB has requested us, the Azad Kashmir has requested us. We're already covering Balochistan and KP for that matter, and this will be done in Punjab as well. So once we have this multi-hazard vulnerability risk assessment done through for districts, we can actually know which hazards will this district be heading towards. In total, we have about good 6 hazards, out of which 4 are really big. But every district is not prone to all this. Karachi will have a different dynamics, Islamabad will have a different. So we need to make our development plans accordingly. So that's primarily what we are doing. That's the DRR portion, the disaster risk reduction portion. One thing which we're doing as a start, although the preparedness hasn't been done earlier as well, we've been in the post-recovery. We've been post-disaster recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction, relief, and all that stuff. Preparedness is now coming in actually, which maybe could have come along a little earlier and we could have saved a lot of money. But I think still it's, as they say, it's better.
This is the 1:7 spend, right? I mean, $1 spent now.
Something. This varies from the nature of disaster to disaster, but yes, to some extent, yes, that's true. Then another important initiative, which a lot of people are now understanding, that's the DRF component, the disaster risk financing. You see, no matter how much you try to reduce a risk, you still will be exposed to a certain risk beyond that limit. So you need to take care of that. So that is where the risk financing comes in. And then there are different options. Insurance is one. We, as an institution, are working on a DRF strategy as well for the country. Then we are developing 2 instruments. And we will be piloting one of them during our initial phases, initial number of years, so that we actually could give the country an option that, okay, this is something we can maybe adhere to.
This is amazing. I think this is all news to us, to be perfectly honest. I think the fact that we did not know about this organization is a very, very important organization. In another one of our talks, we were talking about adaptability in the face of climate change. It's inevitable. It's happening all around the world. I think cities, villages, agri-economy, industrial economy, everybody's being impacted. And adaptability, I think, is one area we need to work on. Getting our farmers ready for how the seasons are changing, getting our industrialists, moving down the sustainable path, city development. I think all of that has to move down sustainable path. So I think this is one of those pockets of excellence we've been missing, Marshall, and we hope this comes together fairly quickly in terms of strategy and implementation. In the area of energy, I mean, one piece of infrastructure that gets impacted, which is critical for disaster recovery situations, I guess, and this is post scenario, is the energy infrastructure, right, which supports everything from communication to basic services to healthcare, medicine, all of those, heating, for example, in cold environments. So are you thinking about energy as well as one of those areas?
You see, this remains as the part of the overall cycle, as the package. You cannot take away one component. It's like, just like a jigsaw puzzle. You put in every piece and then the puzzle gets complete. You see, what is the importance of energy or connectivity in the entire situation? If a gulf happens, a glacier lake outburst flood, well, unfortunately we've had one in the last 3 days, and due to this weather changing patterns and winters getting more winterish and summers getting more, so you see that is when the energy comes into play more than it ever did. You see, under a moderate temperature, a person without energy could survive, but in extreme conditions you need to be absolutely equipped for this one. So that's energy. We are working on the preparedness side. Energy obviously does not pertain to our mandate of the overall thing, because that's with the government.
Sure.
They do. But whatever policy they're going to make is going to affect people. And the most vulnerable somebody is, the more access to energy he or she should have, because that's going to save him or her from that particular disaster. Because the poorest are the most vulnerable. And then that's the disaster cost which hits them the most. So energy remains as part of the overall package. However, we will be taking care of the risk reduction part.
Fair point, fair point. So I just want to focus a bit on climate change, and I think the impact, because that's the forum, right? I mean, we see that as one of the biggest threats to humanity going forward. And as you put it, 7th worst affected country on the index from climate change. I think we need to focus more on the consequences of that happening. On a more accelerated basis, we've seen, the ice sheets melting faster, the temperatures rising faster. All our forecasts have gone wrong. So what do you see as, locally, thinking from national context, what do you see as the biggest threats to us from climate change and from your perspective that could lead to a disaster situation?
I think our preparedness. As you rightly mentioned, that our forecast has gone wrong. So if something was to happen in 10 years, believe me, we weren't prepared for 10 years. And now if that is happening in 6 years, we're still not prepared. And that's because of numerous reasons. But the important part still remains that, okay, what is coming up and how do we gear up for the entire thing? This standalone cannot be answered to me. That this national issue has to be linked to the global context as well. You see, if you see climate change and you connect that with energy, energy is the fastest thing coming up. There are reasons why the world is moving away from coal. That puts us into thing. That do we want to learn from what the developed world has already learned from experience, or do we want to learn that by doing it ourselves? Learning it from somebody else is much better. It saves you cost, saves you R&D, and a lot of other stuff. So that is where the energy comes as a backbone, I think. The renewable energy. That is where we need to start investing. That is where we need to start preventing ourselves. If we remain, for instance, I'll give you one example. If we still remain on dependent on one single grid, and then the climate change hits in its own manner, we're gone for a 6 for that matter.
Very important point. I think it's a great point in terms of how this old model of a singular grid is more vulnerable to these climate threats as compared to what we call as the distributed model. And we've seen, I was quoting in another discussion, this scenario where UK is now going from 900 megawatt average IPP to, by 2050, a 30 megawatt average power plant, size of the power plant. So I think the world is moving towards more distributed power, and the technology, renewable technology especially, rooftop, is improving significantly on that front to enable that future. But you see there's this dichotomy or disconnect at the national level where there's a lot of evidence. In fact, there's overwhelming evidence, right, in favor of all the things we're talking about: more renewable energy, more distributed power, more efforts towards disaster prevention, for example. But we see in a lot of areas policy lagging behind, right? In fact, the policy lagging behind, and we see very little action. I can give you an example from our industry, renewable energy. I think it's very apparent that we're far behind. In fact, not just the developed countries, but the regional powers like India, China, Bangladesh, they've had much higher levels of renewable integration than we've had, while we all started from the same baseline. So, where do you see this disconnect? Why is there this disconnect between what the evidence is telling us and what we're doing? And especially being in such a cutting edge area, you've set up something very unique.
I think I would agree to your point that we all started in the region from the same base point. The policy, I think, is there. I mean, to me, I would not really compare ourselves to other countries in the region in terms of policy, but in terms of implementation, yes. And that is the actual part. Developing a policy, getting the baseline data, getting everything done, that's done. We are there. We have a fair idea, we have evidence that, okay, what is the quantum available, what is the opportunity available with us? And that goes to the policy part. That goes to the opportunity part. That gives you, okay, what can be done. This also tells you what is to be done. But the point is, do you really do it or not? That is one, our apologies in advance, but that is when our tough war comes in. All these stakeholders, the old mindsets, they are holding on to their forts, not improving their quality, and the nation is paying for it.
No, absolutely. This is something we've noticed as well. Yeah, I think the thinking seems to be stuck in the old days, right? And that first principles thinking in terms of what are our problems today and what are the tools available to us, what are the best tools available to us right now to solve those. That thinking is not taking hold. That reasoning by analogy is still happening. That's why I would say, kudos to you guys for setting up something so unique and so important in the wake of what's happening. I want to just take you back to your experience working with the Ministry of Climate Change, because that's a lot more relevant to the discussion we have got today. And I think, again, I would say that this is a very, very important topic for the country. And you were part of that ministry which is supposed to get us ready in line with our commitments that we made to the international community and move us towards sustainable development in line with the SDGs. Now,
I think the ministry has done a fairly good job. You see, we had the climate change policy ready by 2012. So that's 7 years ago.
Again, the policy is there.
Policy is there. Then we came up with the framework for implementation of policy. That's 2013. That's 6 years ago. The framework actually identifies short-term, medium-term, long-term initiatives. It even identifies the projects which have to be undertaken. What can be done? So that is where the ministry comes in. As a country, we are 146th on the scale in terms of emissions, well less than 1%. So mitigation is probably not our game. We cannot really do mitigation to a great extent. I mean, BRTs could be one of the examples and a couple of more, but other than that, we work towards adaptation mostly. So the policy is there, the framework is there, ministry was able to come up with the nationally determined contributions. Now, the challenge is going to be the implementation, which is directly linked to the finance. You see, for all these implementations, you need in-time finance, because a dollar today is not a dollar tomorrow. So the in-time finance coming in, that's going to play the major role. That coming from the global perspective, from the global arena, or from the local arena. I'll give you an example. Since I've been heading the climate finance at the ministry, if you take up a task, you probably would reach somewhere. Just a couple of years back, we had no entity ever accredited from any of the international financial mechanisms across the globe. while countries next door, neighbors, other countries in the region had probably gotten accreditation from international mechanism. For instance, Adaptation Fund opened it, others opened it, so they got themselves accredited. We never even tried. But during the last 3 years, alhamdulillah, we tried. And not only did we try, we got our 2 entities accredited from the Green Climate Fund. That gives us a big leverage.
That's NRSP
and JS Bank.
and the JS Bank.
As the first commercial bank and as the first entity from Pakistan. And that's mostly which is happening with one of
Why
the
do you want
fast
to touch upon the significance of that? So I think you're primarily talking from a Green Climate Fund
Green Climate Fund.
perspective, which is the
You see,
international.
if I look at the other countries, say India, Bangladesh, others, at max they've got 2 entities. And when you get a local entity accredited to the Green Climate Fund, this is called the direct access. You see, they are promoting such initiatives so that the countries who now have their NDCs, their SDGs, and their policies, in order to implement them, they're giving you a local entity. They're giving you a local direct access entity so that you submit your projects and get them running on the ground. So these 2 entities could play a very important role in terms of energy, which could be a better muscle than a bank itself. Going towards green energy, the bank is there.
Could you share with us, I mean, how much of this you think how much of these international pools of fund have we been able to deploy in Pakistan? Is there any estimation on how successful the deployment has been?
You see, there are 2 different things. Within your question, there are two angles to it. One is that how successfully have we implemented, and then how much have we got. I think we've been getting reasonably good money. Not everything can be done by the global community when it comes to cleaning our house. There is something which we need to do as part of our GDP as well. And then at times we realize that, okay, it is not really the funding specifically which would make a development convert into a sustainable development or a climate resilient development. The money still will be flowing in the same manner, but your technique has to be right, your policy decision has to be right, the implementation has to be right. I'll give you most recent examples. For instance, if we since we're talking about the Green Climate Fund, we recently got our Clough project approved for $37 million. We have a BRT Karachi, some part of it funding coming from the GCF. The overall amount is near 600 million, some of which is coming from the GCF. We were able to get approvals for one of our projects with FAO on the agriculture, on the usage of water actually, on the Indus.
Interesting.
You see, water is one of the most important sources. So utilizing that, that's very important. So that's again $35 million. Then we got the national adaptation plans. Then there are readiness programs to prepare a country like ours. We've been getting that for a couple of years now. So the money is flowing in. These good number of $1 million, they are flowing in. The important part is how much do we actually spend on something. I'll give you an example from my current NDRMF. We work on a 70-30 ratio with the partners. We pitch in 70% and we raise 30% from the partners, whoever is implementing. Our 70% is mostly going to the brick and mortar. So that's where you actually calculate to the last penny that, okay, this is where the 70% is going. So if you're making a flood protection structure, the amount goes there. When we look at the overall grants, there is a tendency that we take it for granted. Since it's grant, so it's okay. And then you have so many of administration costs, management costs, consultancies costs. So almost 1/3 money goes away. So that is this fact that I said that your question has 2 angles.
Yeah.
We probably had brought in $100 million. And as per the NDCs, we would be required for answering $100 million. But how much was actually spent? Maybe 50, maybe 55, 60 top. So these are 2 different things.
Interesting, interesting. I think a lot of work has been done. So I think that's been established. So having accredited local partners is...
Sorry, just one small thing. The Climate Change Ministry thought of a need and they went for the Climate Change Authority, which was approved by the Cabinet. It is in place now. And as per the new government, they are coming with an ecosystem restoration initiative, where they're going to be working on nature-based adaptation measures. So the initiatives are there.
Tell us a bit more about that.
You see, it's called the Ecosystem Restoration Initiative. It's currently in the making now. and they'll be developing a fund within that, and they're going to be working on the nature-based solutions. This could involve biodiversities, marine life, others, and all the such, which are nature-based adaptation measures.
Excellent.
Because we see when we work with the natural disasters, there are other disasters as well, complex emergencies as well. So all these have to be gelled in.
Yeah.
And that is when the climate change has brought this initiative up.
Right, interesting, very interesting. Thank you for that perspective. I think that's a perspective that's missing from the public eye at this point, all of the great work that's been done. I think the natural follow-up question is, what more can be done? So how can we accelerate this? Because there's a lot more funding, I believe, that's available, especially because these spots have been specially created for developing countries like ours, countries which can't afford the sustainable development because some of the technology that's coming in is more expensive. Costlier. Not on the energy side. Energy, we know that renewable energy sources are also economical, but I guess some of the cutting edge technology that's required for disaster recovery situations or for climate mitigation costs a lot of money. So what more can be done, you think, to accelerate this access to these parts?
I think we have just started.
Right.
I mean, a lot can be done,
Yeah.
and a lot has to be done. But all which is important is that you need to have a road to follow. Once you have a map, once you have a road map for you to follow, then at least you start working on that one. And we've just started by bringing in, if you look at the global community for that matter, they've been talking about the long-term finance, that is $100 billion aspirational target a year beyond the year 2020. So if we check as part of our share, I'll say if the global community is able to raise 100 billion, and we only grasp 1%, do we really have the absorption capacity of $1 billion? Do we really have a roadmap for that? So if the finance is available, we need to be ready as well.
Yeah.
So you're very right, the technology might be expensive, but if it's available and we are there to grasp the idea and then maybe go for the technology transfer, it might not be cheap today, it could be done 2 years, 5 years down the road. But I think 2025, this could be available.
So action, initiative, ideas, and positive impetus, I think that's what's required.
Exactly.
To move forward. I think what we see, I think, is a great opportunity. I think you touched upon the point that we are way down on the emissions list. We are not one of the worst polluters. But I think what we try and focus everybody on is the great opportunity that is coming our way. The complete reindustrialization towards clean tech that will happen in the coming years to avert the climate crisis. Do we want to take a meaningful part in all of that, or do we want to, play with age-old technologies which have no future? I think that's something we should be more focused on the prize itself. So far, I think there's a lot more to talk about. I think we just scratched the surface, but unfortunately, that's all the time we had today. Thanks a lot for enlightening us.
My pleasure.
With all the great work that's being done, I think compared to building a mosque or building a cathedral, laying the bricks that lead to the building, and I think those things you spoke about, the accreditation when in your previous role, the National Disaster Risk Management Fund, which is going to play a big part in terms of enhancing our readiness.
What we call making Pakistan resilient.
Making Pakistan resilient and being the first one of its kind. I think it's not just a brick, I guess, you're just adding a whole wall.
Let's hope we take it forward from here.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So I really thank you for participating in this dialogue. You add a new dimension to it. There's just one bit which is remaining, I guess. There's a section as part of these discussions which we call the long short. Let me just explain to you how that works. So I will throw a few things at you. I will throw certain items at you, and you have to go long or you have to go short on those. NDRMF.
That's long. Very long.
Fantastic. Pakistan's readiness against climate crisis.
That's good. I would need a middle answer, but I think I'll go for long.
Fantastic. Our commitment to the Paris Agreement?
Long.
Pakistan's energy crisis?
Long.
That means it's going to stay. You believe that energy crisis is going to be prevalent?
No, I take it as from the optimistic point of view. I think this is going to improve rapidly. Yeah. You compare this summers to the last summers, you see a huge difference. The avenues have already been identified, and it's not just the government. It's huge impact is coming from players like you. You're in the market. When you started off, things were different. You actually had to tell people, okay, that this is something which can be. Now there are others following you.
Yeah. So
And
I think it's about building the ecosystem.
Exactly.
And
So
taking it
if
along.
everybody, all these stakeholders are coming in together, I remain positive for that matter.
Fantastic. So renewable energy in Pakistan?
I would rather not answer that as of now.
You can say pass in
Pass.
those scenarios, right? Distributed generation?
That's long.
That's not.
Should be.
Right. Fantastic. So Fawad, thanks a lot for coming along.
My pleasure.
It's been a real pleasure to have you on the platform.
Likewise.